The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Tuesday, November 12th, 2019. Thanks so much for joining us at the Benjamin Dixon Show, and I am your host. Let's go through some data, some polling data for the upcoming caucuses and primaries in Iowa. 41 delegates are up for grabs. The Real Clear Politics average of polls shows that Warren is out in the lead, 21.8%, Buttigieg 17.5%, Sanders 15.8%, Biden 15.5%. All right. New Hampshire, 24 delegates. The RCP average shows Biden 19.7%, Warren tied at 19.7%, and Sanders right there within the margin of error, 19 points even. Buttigieg is at 11 points. Gabbard is at 4 points. That would be a nice 4 points to grab. Anyway, Nevada, which is the next one, which is February 22nd, 36 delegates. Biden, 26 points. Warren, 19.5 points. Sanders, 18.5. Buttigieg, 4.8. And Gabbard is like 1 point. No, nothing to worry about there. South Carolina, the biggest number of delegates up for grabs in February. Biden is out with a whopping 35 points. Warren at 15.5, Sanders at 12.8, and Harris at 7 points. There's no foregone conclusion that Bernie Sanders is going to win this. And I frame the conversation that way because I'm a single issue voter. Personally, like I said, I have no allegiance to Sanders beyond what he's fighting for, matching what I'm fighting for. Medicare-for-All, cancellation of student debt, very significant things that that's going to benefit everyone. So there's no foregone conclusion that he's actually going to win this thing, because the data is showing that he's still not quite resonating with the majority of Democratic primary voters in any state. In Iowa, he's third. In New Hampshire, he is third. In Nevada, he is third. In South Carolina, he's third across the board. Now, obviously, he has staying power. He won't drop out soon because he has a fundraising base that's strong enough to keep him in to go the distance. But it's important that we quickly come to terms with something that I think is still gives the false impression of Bernie performing better than he actually is, and that's social media. Social media would make you think that Bernie Sanders is actually out here just like killing it. And big rallies really make people believe that Bernie Sanders is out here killing it. And that wasn't the case in 2016. And it doesn't look like that's the case now. And so, I think it's really important that people start putting this calculus out there, right? If he's consistently polling in second and third place in these first few primaries, that's a bad signal. That's a bad sign. And a lot of people kind of default to this thing where they say, oh, don't believe the polling. Well, we have 2016 to compare this to, right? There was an overwhelming performance on social media, in terms of how many likes and retweets and just the buzz. And here's the thing, like the bottom line is that there are a lot of people who were radicalized online who believe in this stuff and really are leftists because of what they learned online. But social media and online is not the real world, nor is it sufficient to win this thing, because you're going up against people who are more comfortable with Joe Biden, and they think Joe Biden is going to be able to beat Donald Trump, so they're going to stick with Joe Biden. And then you're going up against people who support Elizabeth Warren, which I completely understand, because up until the Medicare-for-All thing, I supported her. Up until I saw very clearly that Bernie Sanders was going to be the real defender of Medicare-for-All, because I'm a single issue voter. I am. That's all. That's what I'm fighting for this time. So I understand people who support Elizabeth Warren 100% because I supported her. But we can't have this expectation of, oh, they just need to drop out. I mean, that's not how politics works whatsoever. Now, the people who are polling at 5% and below, they really should just get out of the way. And that's what's going to happen probably before we even get to Iowa. But here's the critical thing. Are you going after new voters? Let me not even beat around the bush. Where is the opportunity that you have to make up the most ground in terms of votes? That's where they have to be putting their energy. That's where everyone has to put their energy. Hell, that's where Biden is going to have to put his energy. That's where Elizabeth Warren is going to have to put her energy. They're going to have to put energy into getting votes of people who don't normally vote. And that means going to some untraditional places. That means speaking to crowds that you normally are not. But here's what I've seen more people be willing to do. I've seen leftists and progressives really invest in the idea that we should reach across the aisle and try to convert some of Donald Trump voters. And it's not just progressives. I mean, hell, the Democratic Party, it tries to do that all the time, and it fails. It failed in 2016. You will not win this election by reaching out to Donald Trump voters because they are going to vote for Donald Trump. You won't get out of the primaries doing that because most of these primaries are closed primaries. And even if they weren't closed primaries, Republicans aren't going to get up and come and vote for somebody unless it was just like a massively coordinated campaign by Republicans in order to sandbag a particular candidate. Right. But there's not going to be enough Republicans who are going to go into these open primaries to support your candidate. No. So it's not going to work in the primaries. It's not going to work in the general election because Republicans are Republicans. They are committed to what Donald Trump is doing. They see nothing wrong with what Donald Trump is doing. So you have to talk to voters who are not, to non-voters. You have to. And you have to make up ground in areas where you can make up ground. So, I mean, there's a lot more specifically that I want to say about this. And I think I'm going to wait to the next until after the break to talk about it. But it's showtime. I mean, he's in third in every place. I mean, hell, Elizabeth Warren is in second in just about every place except for one. She's in first in, I believe, let's take a look at it. She's in first in Iowa, which is good because at least, I mean, what we're not going to do is sit back and watch Joe Biden win this. But remember when I said this could come down to just 1 or 2 points. Honestly, this could come down to 1 or 2 points. Maybe not in Iowa because Warren has such a huge lead. Maybe not most certainly in New Hampshire. Most certainly in New Hampshire. The 1 or 2 points would make the difference between Sanders, Warren, and Biden. And who's sitting there grabbing 4 points? I mean, she's as high as 6 points, according to the Quinnipiac polling. Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is sitting there yanking 4 points out of the system for a campaign that's not going to win. I mean, Yang is doing the same thing. Klobuchar, but I have no expectation that Klobuchar voters or Harris's voters or Booker's voters are going to go to Bernie Sanders. I do know with 100% confidence that Tulsi Gabbard voters are going to either just not vote at all because they're going to be so disillusioned and they have full expectation to like Tulsi or bust, right? So fine. But at least 1 or 2 of those points would certainly go to Bernie Sanders. And that would be the difference, particularly in New Hampshire.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
And as always, I'd like to thank our newest patrons. Special shout out to Natalie Fuller. Thank you so much for becoming a patron for the Benjamin Dixon Show. Thanks to Natalie, we are now at 294 patrons. We are only 6 patrons away from 300. Now, of course, I've set a big goal for the end of the year, which gives us like 2 full months to get to 500 patrons. And at 500 patrons, I'm bringing back the live video show with live calls like we used to do back in the day. But 6 patrons. We're 6 patrons away from 300. Let's have 300 patrons by tomorrow, and we'll have another patron party, and we'll be well on our way to the 500 goal. Okay. All right, so let's unpack this. Let's keep digging into something that I started on Sunday night on Twitter. I started by discussing the problem with identity politics and how people have misconstrued the weaponization of identity politics, which I defined, right? Me and the Progressive Army crew, we're the ones who defined that in 2015, 2016. We saw the game that was being played. However, people have taken that and they have gone so far as to dismiss anything that is race or identity related as identity politics and pandering. Now, let me tell you something. The Democratic Party, I don't care which candidate that you have, whichever candidate wins the general election, the Democratic Party is dependent upon at least 80% of black voters voting for them. With a turnout in 2016 of 59%, it still wasn't enough to beat Donald Trump. And here's why. While black people are overwhelmingly clear, at least the black people who come out to vote, the 59% who came out to vote, of the 59%, I think it was like 85% who voted for Hillary Clinton. Or better yet, who voted against Donald Trump. Let's be clear. As we established yesterday, and we have been establishing for some time, black folks go out to oppose Republicans more than they do to go to support the Democratic nominee. Now, while black folks are pretty clear, at least with 85% certainty, that they are not going to support Republicans, you know who's not clear? White people. We just got to call a spade. And hell, Hispanics aren't even as clear as we are, because we have a very keen understanding of the racism that is malignant in the Republican Party, that is ever present. We see the very clear and present. We saw very clearly the threat that Donald Trump posed to America. And of the 59% of us who voted, 85% of us voted against Donald Trump. You don't have that clarity, my friends, in the white community. You don't. You have never had that clarity in the white community. I mean, you've seen What's the Matter with Kansas, Thomas Frank. You see, it's not only a lack of clarity around racial issues, clearly, right? We're extremely clear that there's racism even in the Democratic Party, but at least some white Democrats are clear enough to understand that voting for Republicans is against their own economic best interest. But you guys are still divided on that. And so black voters are having to overperform just to give Democrats a chance at winning, because we have the clarity. We have the clarity about the Republican Party's clear racism, clear and very vocal and very present and very active. I mean, the cruelty is the point. The racism is the point. We're clear on that. But apparently some of your cousins, when you sit down at Thanksgiving with them next week, they're not. They are not. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I'm trying to sound the alarms as much as I possibly can to help you to understand that black folks are tired of you getting our vote and doing the very minimum to get it. And by doing the very minimum, I mean all you're doing is just not being a complete racist asshole. And those of us who worked in the system, those of us who've worked in media, those who've worked in organizing, those of us who've worked in campaigns, black folks, we know firsthand that while you may not be a very open racist on the inside, you're just as problematic as conservatives. And then, honestly, I mean, let's call a spade, right? Conservatives have the wherewithal and the intention of at least funding their black folks. Real talk. They're putting money there. And so while organizers, particularly, let's talk specifically about black organizers in the communities that you absolutely need to secure. So that's the thing. That's the thing. If you all lose just 5 points in the black community, give or take, you lose the election. Bernie Sanders loses the election. Elizabeth Warren loses the election. Joe Biden loses. Whoever the nominee is, they lose the election. Now, it's the same animus. It's the same tension. And I'm actually changing my position on this. I'm actually kind of glad. I'm glad that Republicans are throwing as much money as they possibly can into getting the black vote. They're not going to get it, but it really shows with crystal clarity the difference. Like, they're throwing millions of dollars. I'm going to post pictures on Twitter later on of the Black News Channel that they are funding. And I mean, once they're done, it's going to look like an ESPN studio. They're not playing around. And they're doing it not for the purposes of getting the black vote. Like I said yesterday, they're doing it for the purposes of continuously reminding black people that the Democrats have done the bare minimum for the black community. The bare minimum. And that bare minimum is they haven't been the open, obvious, blatant racists that the Republicans have been. So let me give you an example. Here is a new report from thenation.com saying that single black women aged 36 to 49 on average have a net worth of $5, while single white women in the same age group have a net worth of nearly $42,000. Now, if your instinct says, oh, well, we don't do identity politics, well, you are ceding, you are literally giving the ammunition necessary to the Republican Party to make sure that none of your Democratic candidates will ever win. Not Bernie Sanders, not Joe Biden, and not Elizabeth Warren. None of them. And again, like I said yesterday, and it's something I'm going to say every single time, which part of identity politics do you not like? Do you not like the identity side? What is the problem with discussing issues that are specifically happening to a particular identity? Or is it the political side? Because if it's the political side, then you're not qualified to actually be involved in politics, because politically speaking, you go and get votes wherever the hell you can get the votes. And because the black vote has been so critical, you cannot win. Bottom line, you can't win without black folks. But we are in 2020, heading into 2020, and we have a full court press from Republicans to try to depress the vote with one last Hail Mary. They try to disenfranchise us, right? And now they saw that they couldn't get away with disenfranchising us. So now they're trying the self-disenfranchisement. I mean, hell, you already saw a decline. You already saw a drop in black voter turnout from Barack Obama to Hillary Clinton, right? You saw a significant drop. And that's what you lose. If black folks don't show up, you lose. And here's the issue. Here's the issue is that we have made our coalition with a group of white Democrats, white progressives who, if we begin to discuss racially specific solutions, they become just as uncomfortable and just as angry as conservatives do when we talk about race. That's the problem. So now Democrats are going to have to start making some decisions. Democrats are going to have to start making some decisions, and they make them not in. And listen, this is not about representation. This is about actual policy to address racially specific problems that were created by this country. Number one, but then also two, allocation of resources, which I think is equally as important. Allocation of resources in these campaigns. The $1 billion. I mean, if you add up all the campaigns, you're probably talking about close to $2 billion just on the Democratic side alone. And a measly pittance of a percentage goes into black organizers, into black media. And we are literally your saving grace. It's not an emotional appeal. This is not a figure of speech. We are literally, the data shows that if black folks don't overperform, if we do not overperform on behalf of the Democratic Party, then your white cousins are so divided, some of them still celebrate the Confederacy, that they're going to give this to Donald Trump again. And there goes your entire revolution, or whatever, whoever wins the primary. Y'all open up the checkbooks and get all hands on deck. Create policy. We don't care about representation. We care about policy. This is a specific policy. The issue that black women who saved the damn Doug Jones in Alabama, literally carried into office on the backs of black women, literally will be who carries. I mean, it's really black women more than black men. There's a great opportunity. There's a huge opportunity to galvanize the black male vote. But it's going to take a long-term investment. That's an entirely different show. That's not an investment that I think will hit in 2020. But you should start now, right? But black women are literally the people carrying this party. So it would behoove you, even just, you cannot go into this with the attitude of, well, y'all just have to come over here with us. No, that does not work. That why should they when they have the power? White women, 54% of white women voted for Donald Trump. It ain't going to be white women who save y'all. See, you guys, you got to understand nuance. And I don't mean that just to sound, smart. I say that to say there is the weaponization of identity politics, but you guys have jumped the shark and gone so far away that you don't even realize the political power that you need to win the general election. And I've been trying to tell you, you also need it to win the primaries, particularly South Carolina. There's not enough black people in Iowa to really care. I'm sorry if you're black and you're listening to Iowa. I'm just keeping it real. But when you look at how you need black folks to do, it's kind of like what we're always taught growing up. Black folks have to be twice as good to get half as much. And in this specific case, we are having to perform twice as good in terms of consistently voting with the Democratic Party to get nothing. Except, not a blatant white supremacist in the White House. And now you're not just competing against the general consensus. Like, of the 59% who actually showed up to vote for Hillary Clinton, you had the 41% who did not. That 41%, they pretty much have a general consensus that the Democratic Party is just as bad as the Republican Party. You're not only fighting against that now, you're also fighting against a well-funded millions of dollars being poured into organizing by the Republican Party to convince just 5 more percentage points of black people that the Democratic Party isn't going to do anything for them. And then you juxtapose that with the fact that black organizers have to literally beg these campaigns from Bernie Sanders down to Elizabeth Warren and in between to put the appropriate money in the black community to get the black vote out. You juxtapose that reality with the accusation from the Republican Party, and you have the exact combination necessary for black folks to stay home by just 5 more percentage points. And you know what? Game. Checkmate. Donald Trump gets another 4 years. Maybe you shouldn't have built a coalition that was so necessary, so dependent on black people. But you certainly should not have a coalition that is so dependent on the overperformance of black people and then think you're going to get away with saying, oh, I don't do identity politics. Politics, like football, is a game of inches, or in political speak, it's a game of margins, like just the marginal difference, like just getting 1% more. In a lot of cases, getting 1% better turnout this time than you got last time is the difference between you going to Washington, D.C. and you going back home, or even local politics, you going to the city council. It's a game of margins. And every consultant in the game will tell you that if you want to get those marginal changes, it requires, on a presidential scale, it requires millions of dollars to get that 1% marginal increase. Not only millions of dollars, but I mean thousands of door knocks, thousands of phone calls, hundreds of visits. And I thought about something earlier. I'm going to mix in. I'm actually talking about 2 different things here, but I'm going to mix it in. part of this strategy that the Republican Party is rolling out does involve Kanye West. Now, Kanye West is just doing it because he's going to make money off of it, and because whether or not he believes in God and all, I don't even care about that. But I can tell you one thing for certain, that Kanye West is using all of his star power to push as many people to the Republican Party as possible. And he's doing it from the pulpits of black churches, right? It's a nice little sleight of hand. I'll come in your church to talk about Jesus, and I'm ultimately going to be representing Donald Trump. It should not be the case, particularly with Bernie Sanders. It should not be the case that Kanye West has more appearances and more media coming out of his visits to black churches than Bernie Sanders. It shouldn't. It should not be. For all the reasons that I outlined in the last segment. But it's a game of margins. Let me get back to my main point. It's a game of margins. Like, if you want 1% more, you're going to have to throw hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars at it. You don't change. You do not change the momentum of a massive ship without tons of energy. And this is what we're trying to do. If you're trying to shave off 1%, 2%, 5% from Joe Biden, you got to throw the money at it. You got to throw the organizers at it. And the biggest place that you have an opportunity to make up that ground is the black community. I'm beating a dead horse. I mean, you better listen, or else you're going to get the same results as we got in 2016. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, even though I don't care. I can be that. I'll be whatever I need to be to help us get Medicare-for-All in this country, because there should be not a single person in this country who dies from a treatable illness. I have another segment. I thought I was getting ready to go. I have another segment. I'll be right back. As with every other fight that I have engaged in over the last 4 or 5 years, as with every single fight, I have to fight both sides of the equation. The Democratic Party not throwing the resources necessary to justify getting the black vote is one that I've been fighting, and we're going to fight head on right now every single day, because that's going to be the way they lose. I swear to God, that's one side of the argument, though. The other side of the argument is against the different movements that have popped up over the last 2 years. Honestly, just since Donald Trump has gotten into office, there have been movements that have popped up that are intentionally sandbagging a progressive movement that would give tangible benefits to everybody. And because, well, let me just get specific. You have like the ADOS movement, and there's something new that just popped up called the FBA, Fundamental Black American, or something that's led by Tariq Nasheed, who is a grifter of the highest order. Blocked me on Twitter a couple of years ago, last year, because I called him out on his BS. But that's neither here nor there. You have these two organizations and these movements. They're movements with several thousand people. I would say probably in the tens of thousands. And each of those people represents an influencer in their household, right? Imagine if it's only 25,000 people in this movement, right? 25,000 people who have households or friendships. And when the conversation comes up about who to vote for, it goes something like this. I'm not voting for any Democrat until they give us reparations. Okay. All right. I mean, the logical fallacy there is not getting a Democrat in power or letting Donald Trump stay in power means you're going to be even further away from reparations. Like, you're literally setting reparations back probably by an entire generation by allowing Donald Trump to remain in office. But that's okay. Fine. The second part of the conversation goes like this. I don't care about Medicare for all because that's not a tangible benefit for black people. And the justification in that logic, that unbelievable lapse of logic, is that because it is something that benefits everybody, it's not something that specifically benefits black people. Well, here's why I am a single issue voter in 2020, and why Medicare for All is my issue. It's because black folks die disproportionately from treatable and preventable diseases because they do not have adequate health coverage. Your grandmama, your nana, Medea, your auntie, somebody in your family, my father, would still be alive right now today, most likely, had he had the coverage that he needed to treat him before he had a heart attack. Right? If a heart attack associated with diabetes, if he had the coverage and didn't have to just kind of hook and crook his way to get his medication. This was before Obamacare. This was back in 2000. He died in 2005, right? I'm only bringing that up not to pull on anybody's heartstrings, because who gives a damn about heartstrings? This is a real practical, literal, tangible thing where you would have family members alive right now if we had the system that they have had in the UK since 1949. And it disproportionately affects the black community. So we have these movements that are at a bare minimum tangentially related, connected to right-wing organizations. And their core message is to convince as many black people as possible that, oh, Medicare for All is not attainable. I mean, some of the very people out there talking about hashtag ADOS, hashtag tangibles, hashtag tangibles 2020, some of the very people saying that are probably going to die between now and the time we could have had Medicare for All to get them treated. This is not hyperbole. I mean, listen, we saw with Obamacare, as incomplete as Obamacare was, if we got rid of Obamacare, an additional 10,000 people would die a year because of lack of coverage. How many of those do you think are black? A disproportionate share, you morons. Sorry, not you, my audience. I'm talking to the people who are like, oh, this is not intangible. This is not specific. It's going to help white people more than it's going to help black people. Dead is dead. Dying is dying. And disproportionate is disproportionate, which means that if you're concerned, if you reject Medicare for All because it's going to help white people just as much as it's going to help black people, you really don't understand the definition of disproportionate. It's going to disproportionately help black people to live longer. And so while I have long had a beef with the Democratic Party for what they don't do, the fact of the matter is that if you're sitting here and telling people that Medicare for All is not going to benefit you and it's not something that we should fight for, then the bigger bone is to pick with you, because you're literally going to contribute to your own demise or the demise of a family member or a friend. Somebody you know will die disproportionately so in the black community because we don't have the coverage that we need. And if you're doing this in order to get reparations, if you're doing this in the name of getting reparations, keep in mind that dead black people can't stand side by side with you to fight for reparations.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share,